Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Reversion Podcast. Today, I'm joined by my good friend Conrad, who is the co-host of a fantastic podcast called World War Now, where he covers the ongoing Third World War through the lens of Christian prophecies and rising multipolarity. Conrad, thanks for joining me on the first of hopefully many episodes of this little podcast I'm doing here. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Anthony. It's good to be here. You have one of my favorite Twitter accounts. I don't think that's discreet. I think I make that pretty obvious by, when I share your content. So, hello, everybody. It's an honor to be the first guest.
Yeah, well, it's actually, given the topic that we'll be discussing today, it's I think, pretty fitting because we're going to be talking about cosmology, and being the first podcast episode, what better place to start than observations about the natural world? So just for context, Conrad and we co-hosted a Twitter space earlier this week where we discussed the pseudoscience that is modern cosmology and its impact on how we as Christians dialogue about the natural world. Basically how the space industrial complex and its consequences has been a disaster for the human race.
Oh, it's true. And I think people don't want to, some people get very offended by this. And I respect you a lot for making this your first episode because, in the circles that we roll in the religious world and the online world, you can say a lot of things that are maybe controversial on the news, but in these circles are fairly mainstream, whether it comes to beliefs in even something like creationism, rejecting evolution, being aware of certain groups and in-group preferences, being aware of certain other versions of history, whether it comes to ancient history, and understandings of prehistory and antediluvian, pre-flood understandings. You hear a lot about the net. All these sorts of ideas are fairly common, and you can talk about them and people can disagree on them. But suddenly you bring up the idea that, maybe an endless vacuum of space, stretching endless thousands and billions of light years, that also happens to be made up of 95% dark matter and dark energy that can't be detected in any way. Maybe that isn't true. Suddenly, people start to lose their minds. I think it's an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see this phenomenon occurring in our space among the right, because the right kind of has this claim that we resist all these psyops, and we're not the brainwashed ones, and we're the ones that are noticing and naming the individuals that are behind all of these conspiracies and psyops. But, when it comes to things that are so embedded in our psyche that we've been taught since we were children, that we're taught with visual aids too, all the images that you see of space, of the nebulas, and here's what a black hole looks like, and here's what this planet looks like, and they're all CGI images. And I even posed a challenge on Twitter, and I said, find me a single photo, not an image, a photo of a satellite orbiting in space. And all I got were images of the ISS. Not a single person could produce a real photo that was taken with a camera of one of the 8,000 plus satellites that are allegedly in orbit. On this particular issue, and I'm using the satellites thing as an example, just as to kind of reveal how strong the cognitive dissonance is. But it's to the point where, you could scroll through hundreds of images that are CGI'd on Google Image when you search for this, and that and that wouldn't even ring a bell in your head to indicate that maybe this is all fake and gay.
Well, and I think from our perspective, it's hard because it's important, I think, to convince people why this is even relevant to talk about, because in their defense, St. John of Damascus back in the day said the debate between round earth and the flat earth, he said that ultimately that is not, the realm of salvation. That is not something that's going to matter at the end of all things. However, let's note that, in the 8th century, that debate is a lot different than believing in an endless vacuum of entropic space-time, with, gas giants spinning with supposedly infinite possibilities of planets and Goldilocks zones with life and all this stuff. That's a lot different from, believing the debate that was going on back then, let's say. However, a lot of these people come from these are Christians who perhaps are creationists in some regard, who are maybe theistic evolutionists, which is a silly position, or are, they hold to some slightly opposing views to the mainstream. But again, ultimately they rely on, 90% of mainstream science. Like they believe in space, they would believe in the vacuum, they would believe obviously in the moon landing and the ISS being real. They would believe that the Voyager missions would send back accurate data, these probes, all this kind of stuff. They would still believe all of that narrative. And then, some Christian at some, weird university or someone online with a PhD would kind of write a poignant essay and bring a sort of ad hoc rescue to this position, and someone would show a picture of a star that looks vaguely like a crucifix and be like, here, the glory of God's creation. Endless space, this narrative entirely perpetuated by atheists and evolutionists that in their minds perfectly proves their position that the Earth is just one of many billions of worlds formed over billions of years through statistical billions of likelihoods in a multiverse or whatever. And these people don't want to hear the arguments that we and Anthony may have for actual evidence why NASA is lying or why the ISS isn't real or why gravity is fake, because they are more interested, of course, in the religious and theological implications. And I posit on that regard that the widespread belief that we are a pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan had talked about, floating in endless space, is utilized much more by the powers that be to put a nihilism and a sort of disdain for life and an atheistic secularism, and as well as being an ad hoc rescue for general evolution and theories of creation that are absent of God. It's a lot more powerful for that narrative than anything to do to show people the beauty of God's creation. You have if that were to be true, we'd be in a Christian Renaissance. People would be converting and getting baptized in mass when a new Hubble photo is published, and that's just silly to even say. So to act like this isn't a problem, that there's not at least you need to at least admit that from your perspective, it's all being misinterpreted in a horrible way and leading to something akin to a bit of a mass apostasy, or at least so many people in the church, they'll believe in Jesus and everything, but they will say, but I can't reject evolution. I've heard this so many times from cradle Orthodox, from non-Orthodox Christians, from others, a lot of Catholics. This is a very common perspective in the church on that issue. And all these people who would mock me for my perhaps alternate cosmology would of course then be against evolution because it blatantly posits that death occurred before the fall and death entered into the world. So it's important for people to think that I don't just think it's cool that the Earth, isn't exactly the globe that they tell us it is, and that space isn't real, and that there may be more lands out there, and that there is a firmament actually, like the scriptures say, and that the scriptures are much more accurate in their description of our physical world actually than Neil deGrasse Tyson is. That's cool and everything, but at the same time, I just recognize, and I've had so many conversations with people. I grew up as a Christian. I went to a Christian school, so I've seen people kind of go on their way as they grow up, and I've heard a lot of this stuff, this science stuff, and and in many ways it acts as an easy out for people that have a problem with Christianity or just don't want to be burdened with the morality of being a member of a church or don't want to deal with that. It's an easy out. Oh, I believe in science. Come on now. Sure, that was nice to believe, but I went to university and now we have string theory and quantum and maybe God's real, but I'm really more of a perennialist now. This is also common, and to act like that isn't a problem, I think is disingenuous.
But my dark matter, bro.
You're telling me that you don't believe that space-time literally bends and therefore my keys fall to the ground? You're telling me that I'm not standing on the ground because of warping and bending of massive superplanets and galaxies around me and black holes thousands of light years away? You're telling me it's just density? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, it's funny you brought up the biblical stuff. It's even one of the copes that I kept seeing recurring in my replies, it was the verse. I'm not I would be a bad Protestant because I don't know chapter and verse or anything, but the verse of the heavens declare the glory of God, right? But what's funny is conveniently the people using that verse to attribute space to the heavens. What they were conveniently leaving out was the part where it says in the firmament uh, was it say the firmament declares his glory or something along those lines, right?
Well, it's Psalm 19:1, and it's the heavens
Okay,
declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork.
there you go.
And and I think people need to realize that that's also well known because that was epitaphed on Werner von Braun's
Right.
headstone.
Yep.
And Werner von Braun was, of course, the father of modern. Well, besides Jack Parsons, before Jack Parsons, he was kind of the father of modern rocketry. He was the German. He was brought over and everything, and and without him, a lot of this rocket stuff wouldn't have happened. And those early experiments that was done in Nazi Germany, the stuff that was done in America, involved launching rockets higher than had ever been launched before. And I think it's pretty clear that here he was sending a message that there's a firmament up there and God is real. And I think it's a very little interesting
Yeah.
piece of evidence. But
Yeah, it's just it's interesting that to me that was that was conveniently left out, that part about the firmament. In every instance that I saw that scripture quoted as like a dunk on our position, like, oh, here it is right there in the Bible that the heavens declare his glory. That means space. That means like the infinite expanse of space and everything. And then they conveniently leave out the firmament, and it's like that language that we see in the Bible of how it's describing the world we live in and the cosmology, the ancient Hebrew cosmology. It literally makes no sense in the modern cosmological model. It's funny because you have to use the same scientism cope that you do in any other field, where it's like, oh, well, the science changed over time, and like more was revealed to man through like the advancement of technology, and we've been able to learn more about the world around us through these high-powered telescopes and all that. And it's like
for us gnome giant Nephilim believers, that's a slippery slope that people really should be more wary when they go down. And you talk about the Psalms. I mean, I think most people, if you attend an English language Orthodox liturgy, you sing, of course, praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and you waters that are above the heavens, in the liturgy, written, of course, by St. John Chrysostom. And that's Psalm 148. And St. John Chrysostom himself, I mean, I'll just say it, he believed in a literally flat earth, and his cosmology is definitely more reflective of the ancient model of things than, as well as St. Basil, so they may have disagreed on certain very specific aspects of the shape of the earth. They in no way believed anything akin to the modern perspective. And St. Basil wrote a whole book called Hexameron about creation, and also very extensively speaks about the nature of the earth. And I think that understanding that you hear a lot about special revelation versus natural revelation and God revealing himself through the natural world, I think that is enough justification to be like, maybe we shouldn't be, deceived about exactly what our natural world is and, how obvious our creator is, and not believe a narrative that's designed to make you feel isolated, nihilistic, as well as completely creatorless, as I believe they want everybody to be. And I also just want to posit again, like, you may be saying we're making bold claims without presenting a whole lot of evidence, but I want you to understand that from our perspective, the whole idea of space and these moon landings and the idea of space exploration, space future, these supposed probes getting sent out into endless space, the things you see in Interstellar, The Martian, these movies putting these narratives in your head, these exist because space fundamentally exists as an ad hoc rescue for the general idea of gravity and the idea that there isn't an ether and that the world is not a plane with a firmament above it as described in the scriptures. And in many ways, gravitational theory becomes so silly and ridiculous and becomes the actual reason as to why we have to believe in space. Space has now become the thing that we need to defend because they posited it to prove their theories of gravity. As, for example, I mean, I would walk anyone through the scientific method. The scientific method, many would say, starts with a hypothesis. In reality, it starts with an observation. And then you make a hypothesis about said observation. So to prove gravity, let's grant some people a few things already and make the observation, my book that I'm holding here, when I drop it to the ground, why does it fall and stop? Like, why does it fall to the ground? Well, I would obviously posit that the book that I'm holding, this object, is denser than the air around it, and when I drop it and it hits the floor in my house, that the floor is then denser than the book and it stops. Einstein, or any of his sycophants in the modern university system today, would have you believe that because of supermassive gaseous balls that have only been shown to you by NASA through CGI are spinning in space, and that you right now, despite the fact that you're clearly standing still, are spinning extremely fast through infinite vacuum of space, bending and warping an invisible and completely non-falsifiable or provable entity called dark matter, causing space-time to bend, and then mass to then attract mass arbitrarily, and therefore that's why your book falls to the ground. I think the first explanation makes a lot more sense. And again, I'm sure someone with some PhD may listen to this and type out some long-winded answer and some explanation. But for that person, I'll just demand that you I just encourage you to watch many of the hours of video that prove that the ISS isn't real and answer those questions if you're going to demand that I answer hours and hours of gravitational minutia. I know I went on a bit of a rant there, but I think some of this stuff needs to be said.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that really woke me up to this stuff. It wasn't so much the scientific aspect of it, of, explaining gravity and the compared to just actual density. And it wasn't like the gas pressure or anything like that. It was simply just seeing visuals of how they were faking all of this footage in these, in the ISS and like in these various NASA missions where they're allegedly on a spacecraft in orbit. They're out of the Earth's atmosphere and they're in zero gravity. And you see all these fallacies like, one of the famous ones is there's a glass of water on like a countertop or something. And all the astronauts are floating or supposedly floating around. And then the glass of water is sitting there and the water is just at the bottom of the glass, not moving. And then of course you have all the glitches, the green screen glitches, the famous, there's like a million of them. Can't even keep up with all those. And they watch,
Well, it's really funny because it literally, I think most people, this person that actually probably watches the most ISS footage and the live streams they release and the interviews, the person that's probably watched the most of those consistently are like space deniers and people that are against it, because they know that if they just tune in enough, they're just going to catch another irrefutable proof that this is just obviously a movie set. And then they just occasionally show you vomit comet footage with the same actors going up in a vomit comet flight that any civilian can pay for. That's why those clips are always 2 minutes. You see the ones of them throwing the M&Ms, you see the ones of them doing the water in the rag, and like, here's how we do this in space. Those are 2 minutes long. They're never part of the like 40-minute Q&A where they're all standing there with the women in their hairspray, hair obviously not floating. It's actually like, that's one of the things that I will call a little bit laughable. Like if you genuinely like are going to come to bat for the ISS and defend it, like be prepared to be embarrassed, because it's really hard to defend when someone knows their stuff.
Yeah, and I think that over time the cognitive dissonance has grown so strong among the I guess the mainstream cosmology view that they could get away with more. They could get away with like more trickery because the delusion's gotten stronger and stronger over time. So it's almost like they've gotten lazier with their presentation, and there's still kind of this underlying I think subconscious meme that, oh, well, they're, the broadcast is from outer space. It's like way out there. So of course they can only do these 2-minute segments. Like they're not going to do a 2-hour live stream with no cuts. That wouldn't make any sense, because it's the technology does it. Like there's still this like idea that like we don't have the technology to be able to do that. And then you look at like the first alleged moon landing, and it was like they made a phone call to like from the moon. They like on those old landlines and stuff, like they made an actual phone call that was live and everything. It was like, I don't know. I think that they really think that we're retarded, and the population probably did get more retarded over time as they've succumbed to this mass delusion. So yeah, I don't know. I think that was for me the thing that really kind of perked my ears up a little bit. Was like, it's like, okay, why are they having to fake this? What's the point of that? Right? Like why would they be using harnesses on these astronauts? Why is there the famous bubbles that they come out of they emerge out of their spacecraft, and now they're in space and you see all these water bubbles coming out, and and why are all the Google searches for these things so censored, almost like you're looking for honest information on the vaccines?
No, it's true, and I think, yeah, you pose an interesting point. It's always interesting what initially got someone interested in the questioning the mainstream cosmology, and it's interesting because for me, don't get me wrong, I loved space actually growing up. I would have probably told you I wanted to be an astronaut like most little boys, but I think for me personally, there was always something was up to it about me. I remember at one point they wheeled in this old TV to my like grade 4 classroom, and they show us, I think it was like the latest Voyager footage or like a rendition of the Voyager footage or whatever, and they're going past Neptune and these big planets and explaining all these details about them in my mind. I'm like, wait a second. I don't think they know any of this. Like, I don't think they know what's at the core of Uranus. Sorry. I don't think they know what's at the core of that. I don't think they know like all these. I was just skeptical. And then when you watch those launches of these rockets, they all go clearly are not going straight up and going at an obvious angle to the point where it clearly doesn't look like they're going to get much higher than even where I'm able to see, let alone up in space. And in my mind, I started to realize as I then looked into more things, as I questioned other mainstream narratives, as I realized that if I'm questioning all these narratives of the 20th century and realizing that we live in what I consider an alchemically transmuted reality where the world mind was convinced of a fantasy-based reality, I think it would easily make sense to question Einstein, a Zionist atheist who who was doing his part to contribute to the modern world. And I think if you're not going to question, if you're going to question so many things and then not question basic things like that, investigate the scientific understandings like ether that were held by people and Christian scientists in eras before, gravity kind of entered onto the scene. I think, as well as if you're going to be skeptical of evolution, I think it'd make sense to kind of then be skeptical of the products and the schools of thought that emerged directly out of that presupposition. So I think for me, ultimately, that it kind of just became an obvious point of contention. And I read a book called Cosmos and Transcendence by Wolfgang Smith, who himself, I believe, is a geocentrist. He's a friend of Robert Sungenis, who's a Catholic. And it's a very good takedown of scientism in general. And the first chapter really goes after Newton, and then another chapter really goes after Einstein. And I think it's really a fascinating read. It's free on the Wayback Machine. If you just look up Cosmos and Transcendence archive, you'll be able to find it. So I highly recommend that to everybody.
Maybe I'll leave that in the show notes. So I'll try to reference any recommendations in there, so you guys can have like a point of reference for something. Because a lot of this stuff, it has been buried over time, which that alone should kind of be set off some alarm bells for you. And as we know, in our space, it's like anything that's like mass censored, and there's like this great effort to like memory hole it from the internet. That's the information you should be after. Not that it automatically makes it true just because it's buried, but there's a high likelihood that it is, just because we know their patterns, that they're hiding the truth from us and everything. They have to make these efforts to keep us deluded and keep us in this state of mass delusion. So
I'll read this quote, and I have another quote that I want to read before the episode
Sure.
ends, but I'll read this. Sorry if it's a little long-winded, but
Go
we'll
ahead.
probably link this below. I want to say this is in a letter to Dr. Richard Bentley on February 25th, 1692. Isaac Newton says, "'Tis inconceivable that inanimate brute matter should, without mediation of something else which is not material, operate upon and affect other matter without mutual contact, as it must be if gravitation, in the sense of Epicurus, be essential and inherent in it." And this is one reason why I desired you would not ascribe innate gravity to me. That gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body may act upon another at a distance through a vacuum, without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action and force may be conveyed from one to another, is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has in philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. Gravity must be caused by an agent acting constantly according to certain laws, but whether this agent be material or immaterial, I've left to the consideration of my readers. That, of course, can be sourced on stanford.edu. And it just shows you that the conclusions that were drawn after Newton died, Newton didn't come up with big G and a lot of these numbers that are used in gravitational formula. He left that part incomplete. And then people to fill that in and do what he says here, innate gravity being literally the cause of all motion in the universe, effectively, that is nonsense. He's even said by this man, Isaac Newton, who from a traditional perspective, from a traditional cosmological perspective, already is getting things presuppositionally wrong.
Now, a space fan might be listening to this and at this point thinking, this is why this is so absurd, this conversation. If you can't even affirm gravity when you drop something and it lands on the floor and say that's Newtonian gravity, how can I take anything else seriously in this conversation that you are saying? And it's a common cope with, embracing something that is scientism and doesn't come under the scrutiny of the scientific method. When it breaks down, it's all these mathematical equations, but how do you, for example, even falsify something like the speed of the rotation of the Earth?
Yeah, no, I mean, the entirety of, I'm trying to find the quote now. Einstein literally says that effectively from the Earth, you cannot detect like the spin. Like there's literally no way,
Right.
because the Michelson-Morley experiment literally proved that you can't detect the spin of the Earth. So Einstein basically invents special relativity out of thin air to justify why the Earth is still spinning, but because of relativity, it's not. And now like he basically like says geocentrism can be true if you also say that anywhere can be the center of the universe. It's just total gobbledygook nonsense. I'm sorry. Just it really is. And I think the fact that people are so eager to believe that, as opposed to the fact that no, we're bound fast at the center of the universe, like the scriptures say. The dome is above us. The heavenly bodies that we see are in the waters that are above the heavens of the firmament. It's all real.
Yeah.
There's no contradiction between the symbolic, the moral, the allegorical, the literal interpretation of the scriptures. There's these all are all these things that these hoops you're forced to go through in your exegesis and in your explanation of the world as a Christian to these people that believe the mainstream narrative. They reinforce these separations and these things that you have to use to justify, to separate people and their experience from the truth of the gospel. And maybe that sounds dramatic, and maybe people think that's too much to say for someone who believes, to say to someone who just believes in space and wants to like be a wholesome Chungus moon landing believer. But I say no.
Yeah, so much of the space psyop, let's call it, has been, it always has been visually based, hasn't it? I mean, you mentioned your teacher wheeling the TV into the room to show you videos of space footage, and it's always required a visual to understand, because we can't actually perceive most of these things with our natural observations. So, the interesting thing is that with the alternative cosmology view, let's call it that, it requires a similar kind of process where you have to watch videos and look at different visuals to see how things are in their natural state.
Oh yeah, I think people should. I mean, there's all sorts of Telegram channels that have all sorts of. There are amateur astronomers, amateur filmers of the sky that have documented all sorts of things. Like I believe Crow 777 has documented the lunar wave, which that alone refutes a lot. Like it just raises so many questions about what we're really looking at in the sky and what specifically the moon is showing us. And there's a lot of interesting theories about that. I wanted to read this one quote. I just found it. It's from Einstein. I think it's really interesting. He says, "While I was thinking of this problem in my student years, I came to know the strange result of Michelson's experiments," talking about the Michelson-Morley experiment where they flew around the Earth with these clocks trying to detect the spin. "Soon I came to the conclusion that our idea about the motion of the Earth with respect to the ether is incorrect. If we admit Michelson's null result as a fact, this was the first path which led me to the special theory of relativity. Since then, I have come to believe that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the Earth is still revolving around the sun." So literally, I have literally no way to prove this, but it's still happening. Like that's, he literally just says it right there, which I just always find so interesting. And he mentions ether theory, and basically he's messing up the language so it doesn't seem as obvious, but basically he's saying that, well, basically ether theory would make a lot more sense compared to general relativity. But now I have special relativity, which saves everything and makes it all make sense. Which, I mean, I'm not trying to get terms of service and everything, but, Einstein, he had a lot of, let's just say he married his cousin, he was a Zionist, he was a eugenicist, he's not he's become a secular saint, but he's no moral authority. I think he's a sophist, frankly.
Yeah, I mean, no early life check needed on Einstein, so I think
not at all.
Yeah. So how would you respond to the contention that, and I think this even came up during our Twitter spaces, somebody mentioned this, but basically the contention that it's completely absurd to make a claim that basically all of the most influential cosmologists and astronomers in the last, 300-400 years since heliocentrism became the the established cosmological model, they've all been lying. They've all been consciously perpetuating this lie. And like, for what reason? Like, what reason did all of these figures have to just purposely lie to everybody about the nature of the universe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think in many ways there's a big separation. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say real quick, like, my response was, it's no different than like doctors and scientists that are perpetuating the jabs and the masking and all of the CDC guidelines. It's not because they're thinking that they're consciously lying to people. They honestly believe it's the right thing to do. They believe that this is the established science, and that's the scientific dogma that they can't divert from, or else they lose all credibility. I think that
because it's fundamentally a worldview thing. It's a religion thing. It's fundamentally, most people live a comfortable enough life to where they're like, fundamentally, I don't think that big corporations and the government would actually do something that would harm me. So I can get this vaccine and this thing can be over.
Right. And
it's the same thing for most people. And there's a big separation between the theorists and the people that supposedly launch these things up into space, and the people that they get all sorts of readings, and there's the few people that are in the know are able to easily give the people that aren't enough data and those things to interpret and to make them think that they were accomplishing experimental missions and all these sorts of things. And then that gets, of course, reinterpreted by these theoretical physicists and these people who are fundamentally just philosophers of secularism, who are just trying their best. And literally, Michio Kaku literally says this himself, that we're just making big seat-of-the-pants conjecture ideas and then filling in the gaps with our supposed observations. And remember, all these things we get from space, all these images, all the stuff about nebulae, these are literally computer-generated pieces of art that are supposedly we get from heat signatures and other radiometric data that come from probes, again, which I posit aren't real and aren't actually outside of the firmament that God has created. So, and when you understand, even like when you deconstruct the data and the sources stuff that they're working with, it's actually not that hard to understand what we're saying and realize the deception. The real understanding is so many people have no interest and no even capability and no paradigm that would give them the ability to step back enough and question something like their cosmology, or something like they could be lying to us about space, or they could be lying to us about the nature of the sky and God's creation. Most people, and so much of course, even myths about America have been built up around this, the victory in the space race. And so many people, even like, I hear this so much, like, my dad works at NASA, and so this, like, well, your dad was probably some low-level engineer that engaged in some like project that had nothing to even do with space. But now you're like emotionally attached to the fact that we didn't go to the moon or whatever it is, and you're now like a loyal defender of that, even though you'll rarely hear any actual responses to any of the meaningful critiques. So I think it ultimately is because it's kind of a national myth at best and a religion, if you're going to be honest, at worst.
That's what interests me a lot about this, is seeing how many people like they reject scientism, but then when it comes to scientism regarding the universe, they become like they start soy raging whenever their narrative starts to collapse on them, and they literally don't know what to do. I mean, we didn't have anybody even show up to represent the opposing view on our spaces.
Yeah, everyone and their mother wanted to get a little quote tweet in and be like, "You're subverting the Faustian spirit. Imagine not believing this. Imagine falling for this Cass Sunstein psyop to fill the right with ridiculous ideas." I'm like, dude, you literally believe the Earth is spinning at 66,600 miles per hour around a sun 93 million miles away, that a man supposedly in ancient Greece guessed exactly correct without the use of even a proper telescope, and then supposedly proved the Earth was round by measuring the shadows of sticks. You believe that. You believe that, again, we already explained the silliness of warped space-time and dark matter. You believe that. You believe that Richard Nixon picked up the phone and got a call from the moon, okay? Maybe people will claim, oh, I don't believe in the moon landing. That's, of course, but the flat Earth, that's another thing. Or they're believing in the firmament, that's another thing. Like, okay, well, I think that's just you being afraid of social ridicule, okay? And that's not an argument, and that's really not my problem.
I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, and that's what I was getting at with, like, I keep drawing this comparison to like COVID and stuff. I mean, you could even go as far as to say, like, extend that to like basically all of these kind of positions that we've taken over the last couple years, or been forced to kind of become more extreme on over the last couple years. because people are afraid to become social pariahs because of these views. They're afraid that they're going to lose their friends if they start to espouse these ideas that go against the status quo. And I think a lot of it is fear of that. And that same fear is what drove people to get in line and get the boosters and everything. I mean, it's like that same fear, like, oh, if someone's going to ask me if I got my third booster, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm going to have a meltdown. Like, I'll be cast out from my.
Well, I think there's another kind of, and I believe there's a Plato's cave kind of esque fear that goes on with the globe as well. I believe the globe is in some ways, the modern cosmological perception is a prison. You hear the idea of prison planet. It's more applied to Saturn and ideas of the cube, but I think metaphorically it can apply to the globe as well. They trap you in this vacuum of space on this thing, when in reality you live on a plane that extends farther beyond the ice wall of Antarctica than and people are like, well, the Faustian spirit, we're going to explore space and space future and everything, and like, first of all, that all just comes directly out of silly, like, same people, like all the same people who love Father Seraphim and accept what he says about aliens are the first people to think that Faustian man will go and conquer the stars, which, I'm sorry, that's just a silly nonsense LARP that you think sounds cool on the internet, and you're going to use to disparage somebody who's actually looking for the truth. And I think if you actually understand the world that we live in, and you watch the footage that has been taken in the early 1900s of early voyages to Antarctica, and you hear what Admiral Byrd, who was a high-level Freemason, but if you hear what he actually said about vast lands the size of the United States with exposed coal and resources and fields, and there was lakes that were not melted with ice, and you even see the mountains and understand that there's very restricted access beyond the mountains, and you read the leaked stories of supposed sky ice and the possibility of an actual hard or semi-hard firmament that the government is burrowing into and everything, and you realize that as Russia wages its war, there's even been ideas that Russia might rip up the Antarctic Treaty, which would perhaps open some possibility of more slightly independent exploration of the Antarctic sheet, as it's currently completely restricted by hyper-enforced international treaty that has been enforced against even non-flat Earth / true Earth actors, just simple explorers. So I think people, when they understand that there's actually, who knows how much land is really out there, and something could be happen that make Magellan, Vasco da Gama, these other explorers, these guys that discover the New World, the age of exploration, it could make that look like we could be seeing another one of those. So I think if you're going to throw that at us, let's not pretend that your worldview is a whole lot less interesting than the reality of the situation.
Yeah. It's like space exploration as a subversion of the Faustian spirit. It's like, what is the Faustian spirit? It's, Faust made a pact with the devil. Like he exchanged his
Orthodox niggas be like, I want to go to space and make a deal with the devil, and you're clearly have a problem with you're the problem for thinking that's bad.
Yeah. Like, oh, you want to, you're subverting this Faustian spirit by not wanting to explore space. And what is the Faustian spirit? It's an actual, he exchanged his soul for material gain. That's the whole the Faustian spirit is to explore and sacrifice your spiritual values for like a material wealth, like for knowledge and material gain.
You always got to make the sign of the cross at the crossroads, lest you perhaps fall prey to a Faustian wager cleverly laid.
Yeah.
And let's not forget perhaps the idea, like, what is it with these people launching phallic-shaped rockets at the sky, scraping against God's firmament, trying to bust through? Like, if that's not Babalian, yes. I don't know what is. People get really offended at this idea that I compare NASA and space travel to the Tower of Babel, but I will never stop. You will never stop me. I will never ever stop making that comparison because it's so damn true.
Yeah.
This just that all the space travel stuff is already like that's the silly nihilistic poo-poo fantasy of lab coats after they've burst through the firmament and surpassed God in their minds. Like, that's what they think. That's why they made up the quote that Yuri Gagarin said, oh, there is no God up here. He may not have actually said that, and he may have, been a crypto-Orthodox Christian. That's also not evidence for space, first of all. But they still tried to subvert that entire narrative into another big own for space theisms, atheism in space, which is still what most spacetards believe.
I did have a couple questions that we may or may not have covered, but I was wondering, just like on a more personal level, like, what would you say was the the one kind of like smoking gun that really opened your eyes to the fact that this space narrative is all fake and gay?
Well, I was always, as I said before, I was always a little skeptical of the whole space thing and some of the planets and the stuff we had been shown. But this is a little controversial, but I'll be honest. The thing that fully, really just made me realize is I saw a video of somebody bought a Canon P1000 and went to the beach and watched a ship go over the horizon, and they zoomed in, and the ship came back into view. And that shouldn't be possible if the Earth curves at 8 inches per mile squared. And it really doesn't matter. Literally, like I've yet to hear a single response from somebody that thinks that I'm the most retarded person they know for believing the Earth is flat. I've yet to hear a good response to that. I've yet to hear it. And you can prove it on all sorts of other ways. In the early days, in the end of the 19th century, someone observed over 21 different lighthouses that were supposedly completely visible to ships at a rate at a supposed curvature rate of the Earth so extreme that there would be no way that they would be able to see the light of that lighthouse. And they submitted this to the Royal Academy of Sciences and everything, and they said, well, this study was biased because you only chose lighthouses that do that. What do you mean you only chose lighthouses that do that? No lighthouses should do that. Why are any lighthouses doing that? What it shows you is that anyone skeptical, like they view any of this line of inquiry itself as silly. They don't even think the conclusions are silly. They are programmed to call you silly because it's a regime narrative.
Yeah, they don't even get to the point of hearing whatever comes after the point that they realize you're doubting the established narrative. They don't even get, like, their brains just shut off as soon as they realize, oh, this person's going, oh, I say where they're going, they're retarded, so I'm not going to even engage with this. That's where their brain, that's what they do. But yeah, the horizon thing's really interesting because, going back to the scientific method, it's like, how can you falsify the dimensions of the curvature of the Earth? How can you falsify that? If you can't falsify it, then it's not science. It's something else. It's scientism.
Refraction makes it unfalsifiable. Well, that's just an ad hoc rescue, okay? I don't believe that people can see the Chicago skyline or the Toronto skyline across the Great Lakes because of refraction. I believe they can just see it, okay? You're the conspiracy theorist for convincing me it's some light-bending magic trick. It's much more likely that the Earth is just flat.
This is this is a spicy one. So we went there, but I mean, I think that it's no secret. I've actually had some after our Twitter Spaces, and I think probably even before that, there was some suspicion because of the nature of some of the content that I post regarding space. I mean, even just kind of going with the meme of space being fake and gay. A lot of that raises a lot of eyebrow. I mostly in my community, it's mostly been just people that are like, yeah, that's right. But like, there's a few people that are like, wait, what do you mean by that? What does that even mean? Like, I've never heard those words spoken before. How can you even say that? That's like quite an absurd claim to say space is literally fake. So that was one thing that I did notice is that people had been DMing me and stuff, and they don't want to be outspoken about this kind of thing, but they're, some of them are asking my position on it and stuff like that. But I have been getting DMs. I think there's a lot more people out there than we think, who reject the modern cosmology, and hold to alternative views regarding the nature of our Earth. And they're just, for obvious reasons, they don't want to express it publicly. It comes with a lot of...
I'll say this. I think a lot of people, like I've met people that have nothing to do with me and my source of the internet that are embracing ideas like geocentrism. I'll be honest, yeah, a lot of people are afraid of the idea to say the Earth is flat, because kind of a flat earther, that's like that's one step, like it's not as vitriolic, but it's just as alienating as being called like an anti-Semite or a racist or something like that. So I understand why people are afraid of being labeled that. However, I just don't care, and I care about what's obviously true. That being said, don't let maybe your aversion to that and my perspective push you away from the more compelling point of the argument. Like it's much more valuable to reject space, to reject the ideas of space travel and space future, to perhaps embrace interesting ideas of the firmament, interesting ideas of our just become a more curious person about those as opposed to having your book closed. That's the thing. That's the other thing. We're not making that many wild claims about exactly what the universe or our cosmology is. We're literally just telling you, like, there's a whole lot more we could learn, and we have a strong feeling that it looks a lot more like what the Bible says. Whereas the people that are yelling and screaming at us are like, no, you have to believe it like this. You have to believe like it's the way that all these atheists and secularists and eugenicists and 20th century nincompoops said it was. Like, and if you don't, you're just making our religion look bad, and it can't look bad. Like, I'm sorry. Like, it's just get over it. You think your religion is gonna look. Your religion already looks bad. Okay. You were like to people that believe this stuff, they already hate your religion. So put that aside.
Yeah, and it's almost like a meme that you'll see in Christian apologetics, where they'll say things like, "Oh, the Bible isn't a book of science," which may be true, but the main reason that they're saying that kind of thing is to avoid having to confront the fact that ancient Hebrew cosmology was vastly different than modern cosmology, and because you have all this language of water being underneath the foundation of the earth, you have the language of the firmament and waters above the firmament, so it looks nothing like the modern heliocentric cosmological model. So that, I mean,
are we just going to reject the basic symbolism that's given to us in creation, up and down?
Right.
Like the beauty of the foundation versus the darkness of being buried in the earth. Like, well, actually, that's just a perception because it's round. If people in Australia, down is up. Like, this is demonic, in my opinion. This is totally Masonic, Luciferian stuff. And I will tell you, the transmutation of a flat plane into a sphere is an alchemical Masonic act in and of itself. Look up any Masonic art, any imagery that comes from Masonic literature. You'll see, of course, the checkerboard floor of the plane with the two pillars of masonry on the side. On the top of one of the pillars being the square and compass. On the top of the other side being the globe. Like, literally, it's straight up showing you that they made this dang thing as a deception. It's like the key of masonry. It's on the pillars and the top of all of the, and they recreate this in photos. I'm sure people saw the photo where the Ukrainian U.S. flag hybrid, where all the members of Congress are holding it, and you of course have Dan Crenshaw and his one Cyclops, one eye himself, in the middle with his eye patch, and then you have the two other congressmen facing the other way, representing the two pillars and the. What's on top represent exactly spaced in the photo. Look it up; it's fascinating.
Yeah, and even in
the cosmology and stuff is Masonic. It's completely Masonic in root, just like the origins of heliocentrism come out of Jesuitical, corrupt Vatican, Venetian crap that funded Copernicus and Galileo, and the science tries to reinvent it as some papist crusade against science when they were funding those guys up until they decided that they didn't like the Pope and had personal beef. It's all a bunch of crap.
Yeah. Even the all-seeing eye, it's got the rays coming out of it like it's the sun. It's like it's shining, and that's at the center. So, yeah, there's
what makes more sense? Think about this. What makes more sense? Again, just forget all your programming. Imagine you're an Aboriginal and you lived in the desert and everything you saw around you is just your senses, right? Imagine that. What makes more sense? That this ball 93 million miles away, because our Earth is tilted on a random axis that you also can't feel or have evidence for, that's why we get random seasons? Or is it likely that the obviously local ball of light ahead of us at one time is rotating around the Tropic of Cancer up in the north when summer is up here, and then another time is rotating around the Tropic of Capricorn down below? This, of course, can be explained on a flat Earth model, but this kind of basic explanation of stuff, really, when you start to think about it, even when you start to think about it at a deeper level and the physics behind it, it still makes a lot more sense than the blatant ad hoc rescues of the cosmologists of today.
What would you say is the primary reason that the modern view of cosmology conflicts with the historical view of Christianity?
Well, again, it's not that if you believe in heliocentrism, you're evading some dogma of the church. Let's make that clear. That being said, I think there's a big difference between maybe even believing heliocentrism and believing the complete modern version of cosmology with endless space and the multiple solar systems and the galaxies and the theories of entropy and getting into quantum and string, or just understanding just dark matter and dark energy in general, believing that stuff. You start to just get into total religion territory that has nothing to do with Christianity and Jesus. That being said, read the Genesis story and you read what happens. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and you read it, and he creates the firmament, and then he creates the sun and the moon. And some of these things all come after the firmament. And so the sun and the moon are clearly, I think if you just read the scriptures, it makes more sense of them as local lights for light and dark that are set within the sphere of the firmament, and the stars are set in the firmament themselves, and the planets actually are wandering stars. There's not this, they've created this big bifurcation because they've conflated the sun and stars, when if you read the scripture, they're actually different things. Yeah. And again, some are saying that's just way too literal of an interpretation, but I just don't think that any of those levels of interpretation, whether it's literal, moral, allegorical, whatever your category of interpretation is, I know there's 4 major methods of literary interpretation there in exegesis, I don't think any of them are in conflict. And yeah, in your mind, that may involve what you view as putting too much emphasis on the literal, but I just don't think that there's any conflict with the other interpretations, with understanding that in a very literal sense. And I believe the order of creation on all the days represents a much more obvious model of the universe. I believe the earth being at the center of the universe, and man, of course, being at the center of creation as God's highest form of creation, just makes obvious anthropological sense. And I just think, again, I don't think that even when Father Seraphim Rose was writing in the 70s, that Carl Sagan was just really perpetuating the idea of the true endless cosmos. Like, the cosmos was coming out at that time. So even from his perspective, he may have not explicitly, quote unquote, denied space, but the worldview wasn't even all the way there to where it is now. And his rejection of aliens, I think, blatantly goes against this idea that there's all these Goldilocks zone planets that are supposed to, and sure, people will say, well, we believe in infinite space, but we don't believe in evolution. But like, okay, is infinite space there to be explored or not? Because if it's not, we're never going to see any of it besides through atheist interpretation lenses at NASA. So all of these interpretations just start to really ring hollow when you start to actually think about the implications of the institute, and especially the views of the institutions today that perpetuate all these ideas, especially the people that are supposedly sending rockets into space.
I'm of the view that I think that Father Seraphim would I mean, of course, it's all speculative, but just from my familiarity with his work, I think that he would have certainly rejected much of the popularity of NASA and how it became this kind of whole religious movement. The NASA, the soy facing over NASA and everything. I just want to read a quick passage from his book, From Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. This is where he raises the alien question, where he says, that aliens are demons, which he actually doesn't say explicitly like that, but he, in many cases, he makes that argument that they are demonic entities. But he says here, in the 19th century, it was usually necessary to seek out dark seance rooms in order to enter into contact with demons. But now one only need to look into the sky. Usually at night, it is true. So I think that he's referencing, and this is, to kind of bring it back to how this all started, this, I guess, controversy. It's not even really a controversy. It's, it's just this dialogue that began on Twitter. It started with a comment that I made about demons occupying the spatial realm, like what we call space, right? And there was a lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but there was a few people that were really upset about that. How could you, the space is where all this beauty of God's creation is. How can you say that that's occupied by demons? There's, again, referencing Father Seraphim's work, this is the realm that they exist in. And you don't even have to go to Father Seraphim. You can go back to St. Paul, who wrote about the aerial realm. This is where the Ariel Tollhouse's doctrine comes from. That there's an aerial realm that demons occupy, and that's where how Satan is the prince of the power of the air. There's all these scriptural references of this aerial realm being occupied by demons. So my question to the critics of what I was saying is, where do you suppose that aerial realm is? Because we can talk about, the fact that this view, it is a view that is not found in any doctrines or dogmas of the church necessarily.
Well, but look, we've even seen in iconography, we've seen demons, on phones and laptops and stuff. The demons of the air, I believe that they directly have an impact on the aerial waves, television, these Wi-Fi networks, things going through the air, that it becomes a playground of demons, as we've seen, of course, in the epidemic of pornography abuse that comes from the internet, people's minds just being rotted through these devices. And I think to abandon this idea that, well, yeah, sure, the air, the space, it's this metaphorical battle, and there's the higher places versus, like, that's all well and good, but to just disregard any of the literal interpretation, it just limits your ability to interact with this world that we live in, and I think to fully fight spiritual warfare.
Right. And the iconography does attest to a lot of that. That there is a material, there is a physical element to some of the,
I mean, insofar as demons are all trying to incarnate, insofar as that's
Right.
why they hate man and want to destroy him, because they don't have bodies and are trying
Right.
to bring as many embodied people down away from perfection as possible, as well as in their time inhabit them and lead them to sin and engage in viceful pleasures while inside and possessing the body of a human.
Right. So it's this. So that's exactly the point from Father Seraphim, is that these demons, they manifest in these physical bodies, these material. They're able to interact with and manifest the material. Now, if they occupy this realm, the aerial realm, where these quote unquote aliens are, materializing, where is that realm? That's my simple question. So it's like, I'm not
Well,
saying.
I think St. Gabriel Ergabadzi of Georgia answers that question, and he says explicitly, during the Antichrist times, the strongest temptation will be anticipation of salvation from the cosmos, from humanoids, extraterrestrials that are actually the demons. One should rarely look up at the sky, as the signs might be deceptive, and thus one may be ruined.
That's a powerful quote. Yeah, we'll
So
have
there's
to.
your answer. It's the air, it's the sky, it's fucking space, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. So that was, I think that was I had realized after kind of thinking about some of the contentions that were raised in these series of tweets that I made, that I think that was the main disconnect I was noticing people have, is that they're not able to identify that
Dude,
realm,
they're stuck in a
that aerial
Cartesian
realm.
mindset, bro. They're stuck in this Cartesian dialectic of, separation of mind and body and spirit and body, and this idea. And that's not to say that, sure, our souls will be separated from our body, but a full human is soul and body. A human can transcend the realms, and that's why those who can't hate us, we're phase shifters, man. This sounds a little autistic. I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to go off the rails on any kind of anthropological doctrine here, but in general, it's the spirit of the age, and there's you either go full new age, or you're still stuck in this crypto materialist mindset. And people may not even know it for themselves, and maybe this is arrogant to say, but I can just tell when somebody is just going through their day, just making, and their life just of making sure that they don't seem too crazy to the science narrative in their Christianity, because they're just afraid of that.
Yeah, it's the same fear of the backlash of professing your faith to non-Christians. Now it becomes this whole extra thing where it's like, oh, but I have all these other views that I don't want them to think that I'm this insane person, and then that will invalidate my witness, my testimony, or whatever you want to call it. I think a lot of it is, and I'm also not trying to say that you need to be this like big brain autist that like can give these very detailed explanations of everything, literally everything in the universe.
Well, except that you already can't do that, and most people can't,
Right.
and yet they still act smug about believing the current model, when in reality they're just outsourcing their opinions to maybe a university professor at best, at worst, Bill Nye the Science Guy and Black Science Man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even at the worst, it's like those two guys are kind of the spokespersons of that whole the space tard narrative. I mean, if you believe in all this stuff that like, all this dark matter occupies the spaces where it's all theoretical stuff where it's like the dark matter, like the dark matter is a cope. That's what dark matter is. Let's talk about dark matter for a second, because I think that's a big thing that is like, I think a smoking gun in a sense of the modern cosmological model, how it's like, it's all these mathematics that are supposed to explain how dark matter is like making the stars like move on the outside of the.
This thing is happening that there's no evidence for besides from NASA, and so because it's happening, there has to be a cause. Therefore, dark matter must exist, or else the
Right.
explanation would be something that goes against the nonsense we've been telling you for the past 100 years.
Yeah, and like dark matter is
Maybe the ether is real. Maybe there's a firmament.
yeah.
Maybe God created you and you must repent before your judgment. Maybe all those things are true, but they will not tell you that because they've gone so far down this road, down this alchemical transmutation, that they can't go back now. They're hoping to see, total Zog victory before anyone wakes up to what's going on.
I really like that description of it as an alchemical transmutation. That's very powerful imagery. I think that our audience is familiar with that kind of symbolism, the occult symbolism of the power in those symbols, that they're not just coincidental. We all know that about like occult symbology and just the occult in general, that it's not just a bunch of like autistic shapes and symbols and things that people just think they look, they look epic and based and all that. Like they actually have a spiritual significance to them. And that's why they're these kind of spiritual memes that reoccur in the occult. So that imagery in itself of the transmutation, the alchemical transmutation of a flat, of a flat object becoming a sphere, that is very powerful imagery, and that should be something that is raising red flags right there.
Oh, I agree, and I think we may be about to wrap this up here. I don't know, it's your show, obviously, but I want to make sure that people can message me on Twitter, DM me. Maybe I'll call some people on the phone, talk to them on voice on Discord. It is better to talk about this stuff, but
yeah.
What I'm not going to do is engage in extensive polemics with really nasty people throwing ad hominems on the timeline and quote tweeting. Like, I'm either just going to block you or, post a bunch of videos and hilarious stuff and just not reply to you and have a bunch of people ratio you because I have a better audience than what you do, most likely. So with all that being said, I want to be sure to read this quote from St. Athanasius that I think is a great capstone from at least what I've been putting forward on this show. And I want to thank Anthony for having me on. I think this was riveting. I think I went off a little bit, which is fun. But St. Athanasius, this was against the heathen. He said, "But the earth is not supported upon itself, but is set upon the realm of the waters, while this again is kept in its place, being bound fast to the center of the universe."
That is a great place to end, and I appreciate you coming on here, Conrad, and also for doing me the honor of wrapping up my my first podcast. I think that's fitting. Having a seasoned podcaster just have that internal clock, knowing it's time to wrap up. It's been an hour, but yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on, and this was I really enjoy this discussion. I could easily go on for like another couple hours. I'm not nearly as informed, obviously, about this stuff as you are, but that's why I wanted to have you on, to just get some perspective on this and get some of the more educated side of this dialogue. So thank you for sharing all that with us. We're going to be leaving some references in the show notes, and I'll obviously link to your podcast, to World War Now, and to your Twitter and all that. So we'll get the appropriate promos in there. So anyway, thank you all for listening and sticking around. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this episode. I know that it's quite spicy to come out of the gate with a brand new podcast, with the first episode being on Flat Earth. So it's a good filter, if anything, for those of you who will stick around in the future. But please let me know in the comments any feedback, ways I can improve the show, guests that you might want to see me have on, topics you'd want to see me cover. I appreciate all your engagements, and I look forward to producing more content for you guys moving forward. Anyway, signing off, Anthony of Westgate. Till next time, God bless.